Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Right, so welcome to the Games and Gaming panel. Myself, John Dodd, I'll be the moderator for the panel, which means hopefully I'm going to be talking as little as possible. I'm just going to glance this way and no one's backing me up there. I'm in the trouble. So, we're going to go through everybody step by step, just get everyone to introduce each other and go from there. So, my name's John Dodd. I mostly work in tabletop role-playing games. I also do board games. And I run conventions. All of them. For want of better phrasing. So yeah, but I also write for a number of the publishers, and it's all tabletop role-playing games.
Hello, I'm Lauro, and I am mostly a horror/weird fiction writer and a video game nerd, but I recently started my first job as a video game narrative designer in July, so yeah, this is an exciting time to be in.
Hi, I'm Holborn. I'm the author of Nunslinger and the Trigonometry series, and most recently Tenlo, which is a space western kind of thing, out from Titan recently. I'm also a games writer. I'm currently lead writer on a game called Shadows of Doubt, which is a procedurally generated science fiction noir detective game. And I do freelance games writing work for other clients like BBC, Cartoon Network and Adult Swim.
Hi, I'm Amy Brennan. Can you hear me? I'm a gamer, mostly role-play gaming and LARP. I have dipped my toes into running RPGs, and I'm currently poking a solo play RPG journaling game.
We'll talk about that later. That's, right. So, quite a few of us also write fiction as well. So what I want to do in the first instance is talk about how the difference is between writing regular fiction and full-length stories, full-length novels, and writing for games, and the difference that we got. So, if I can start with Stock.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love doing for games is world building, and luckily the game I'm working on, it already had an amazing kind of basis in an alt history version of 1980, and so I just, mega corporations rule, and it's like Brazil, basically, so I just got free rein to kind of go mad with that. But some people will read every word of a dystopian rental agreement, which, I've embedded a couple of those into the game, but a lot of people won't. And so it's trying to get as much story across in as few words as possible, to be really kind of selective about what you put in. And that's for me has been the challenge of trying to be economical with language as possible, I think, in the first instance. And then just learning new techniques as well. I mean, last year I taught myself Ink, which people who've played Around the World in 80 Days and Ink, anything by Inkle, and it's great and it's really, really good fun, and that kind of opened up into I've been exploring a chance to use it and writing on, but I do write and explore. So that's kind of where my writing is intersecting recently.
Indeed.
So, I've only run one so far, which was called Trash. Grant Howitt's one-page. So much fun. And it is a lot different running a game to writing, I've found. When you're writing, you have to do all of it, the characterization, everything, whereas with role-play games, you have a framework of this happens, and you let your players have at it. So mine ended up creating this really cool, really quite philosophical religion for these trash kin, where everyone is trash, and you return to the trash, and that was really, really wonderful content that came out of it.
Excellent. Laura.
So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm absolutely brand new to games writing. It's the first games writing I've ever had. And as a player, I love games, I love playing games, but kind of seeing it from the back end, so to speak, is really unusual. So one thing whether my process is the same as everyone else's process, I've got no idea. The way it's kind of worked is I write a script, and then you put it into the game, and then you see whether it actually works in the game. And writing dialogue is one thing, but then when you actually put it into the game and you play through it, you kind of learn, oh, maybe there's, too much explaining here, maybe this slows the pace of the game down, maybe we need more dialogue in this space. So I think learning to iterate as you go has been really interesting to me. So, and as someone who edits compulsively as I go anyway, it's been, I've adapted to it quite well, I think. But yeah, as Stark said, the temptation to over-explain. And I think what we've kind of striking a balance between, because we want quite a complex world with complex lore, you do want the player to know about the lore of your world, but you don't want to dump it on all the dialogue. So you've got to give just enough lore that players are immersed in the world, and not so much lore that you're just dragging them through all of this, as you know, Bob, you know, all this kind of dialogue. So, you know, yeah, it's really interesting writing your dialogue in Word or whatever it is first, then putting it into Unreal or whatever engine you're using and seeing how it works in the game, and that's really the point at which you realise whether it's working or not.
The minimum railroading possible, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think the fun part is when the dice decides where your characters are going. That's always interesting, because it constantly throws you a loop, and you're constantly having to think, oh, I did not plan that. Think.
Also barks. I mean, when you're writing dialogue barks, they look different on the page. And then you see them in the game and you're like, oh, why are all these people saying things all of the time? My God, stop talking about the rats. Oh, and then so you then have to think, okay, we need to dial back all of that, or actually that really doesn't work, now I'm seeing it in context. So yeah, it's that process between self-editing and actually then seeing it in when it's actually in the game, going, oh no, actually context is everything here.
The first time you see dialogue in a game, when it pops up, and I've had this recently because we did like our first one of our first builds, and oh my God, that's my words, and the characters say my words, and I kind of read it and thought, no, I can't have this. No, that doesn't work. No, 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 you can't say that. That just doesn't work in the game. It's totally different experience.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, when you're writing for tabletop role-playing games, you've got to keep the balance between what you're telling them about the world and what the world actually is. And there's adventures that you can write, but then they'll take them in completely random directions as any point. In fact, no plan survives contact with the players, it never has. If you think we're going to follow that adventure, there's no chance. We'll say, right, there are two forks here, doesn't matter which one you take, they both lead here. And it's a strange thing, really, isn't it? I imagine with the computer side of things, it's going to be far more structured because they can go that way. But then if they come back and go that way instead, it's the same thing, like, yeah, got you. Which, yeah, maybe not. So how do we feel people engage in a different way between the different types of games? So when you've got, for example, moment of inarticularity here, but when you've got the procedurally generated one versus the one that's scripted versus the one that's completely freeform, and how do you feel that people engage differently to them? How do you feel people particularly engage towards what you're doing? So we'll start with, well,
It's a tricky one, I suppose, because I'm new to games writing, and also I'm brand new to tabletop games because I only really started playing them during lockdown. So it was a brand new, which is odd as someone as nerdy as I've been all my life to have only encountered it then. But yeah, so I mean the game that I'm making at the moment is designed to be linear. So there isn't really there's a kind of the illusion of choice and the illusion of, but it is the plot is the plot is the plot. As a gamer. You know what? I'm going to be controversial here. I like linear games. I think games now are a little bit too big. They're too broad, and that can be good. That can be really cool. But I also sometimes just want a story to be told. I guess with tabletop RPGs, what's really nice is you drive the plot, right? And I think I feel bad for our GM who has been really wonderful teaching my husband and I how to play tabletop games and. Probably really challenging. These complete noobs who don't know what we're doing, but
best time.
Yeah, it's different, I suppose, because it's player driven. So even though there is a campaign and there is a story, a lot of it, I think that you've got. Maybe I'm wrong, but I imagine there's quite a lot of flexibility involved in being a GM. You've got to kind of be able to react and make things up on the fly.
Very much so. I was making up content on the fly on the first session because I hadn't planned enough.
Yeah. Or even if you do plan, like you were saying, okay, you've got a fork in the path and a fork in the path, and you say, oh, you can only, but they both lead to the same place. Do they really lead to the same place? Do they? I mean, but I imagine the procedurally generated game is probably a different thing to a linear game, right?
Oh yeah, it's really tough, and that's actually been one of the most interesting things for me, because with Shadows we had a big alpha test, so we think we had about 500 people who signed up, and just seeing the different play styles. I mean, some people in the city, because it's kind of a noir detective game, they were literally going to the nearest all-night diner and just sitting down and just looking at people for like half an hour. And I'm like, okay. Like, they were actually inhabiting this space, and really all they wanted to do was wander around the city and explore it. Some other people went, straight for the murder, straight for solving it, weren't reading anything, just picking up the clues super quick. Other people were pouring through every document. So, especially with procedural generation, when in this game you can name the city, you can decide how big it is, and it's going to be different every time. So, you really have to be open to have the story being able to unfold and people being able to make the story what they want, which is, again, it has a real kind of resonance with tabletop play, because people can play this game how they want and we have no control over that, and so it has to be coherent for such a wide variety of play styles, which I've DM'd one game with a very small group of people. That was what I found quite challenging, was the fact that I had no idea. Yeah. And I'd done all this prep, and they didn't do any of it. Nope. And I was like, I'm struggling with this.
I learned very quickly on that first episode of Trashkin that, right, okay, just do a few bullet points, make it up from there.
Yeah.
I think, and you have to be able to sort of trust your own imagination to be able to guide this stuff. So it's almost kind of a hindrance if you've done too much work, because then you want to steer it the way you've kind of decided it will go.
And if you railroad it too much, it becomes not fun.
It's interesting when you talk about different play styles, because you made me think about when I first picked up the Yakuza games first time. And I started late. I joined in at Yakuza 6, and the main reason I picked that up is because there was a cat cafe simulator in it, which is obviously the number one reason to pick up a game. And I think, because obviously there's a storyline and it's combat based, but for me the joy of it is running around the city and just doing things like, I'm going to go and see what I can buy in the convenience store. I'm going to go and pet these cats. I'm going to go into the karaoke club and I'm going to sing. Almost treating it as if I get to run around Tokyo or Osaka or wherever I am and just live like living in Japan simulator. That's how I play the Yakuza games. And I know other people are like, what, you don't level up, you don't fight? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's not the most interesting bit though, is it?
I have a slightly different opinion to that, mostly because I was in a Mage to the Ascension game for 5 very long years. Yep. It was a great game, but every story should have an ending, and that one sort of like just petered out and died a death, which is a shame because I really want to know what happened with half of the plot. Whereas other games I've played are really, the one that got me into running Trashkin in the first place was my friend Kath ran After the War, which is created by Alistair Stewart, and I can never remember the other name. But it's a great one where basically there's been this huge war and music, it's basically the enemy. There's this thing called the song and it takes you over. So anything musical is suspect, which makes things really interesting when it comes to actually trying to do stuff practically, because you're not allowed to hum or anything because you have to police yourself on that. Because if you start becoming lyrical, then you're suspect. So that's great. We didn't pick up on iambic pentameters for the longest time. But it had a defined start, middle and end. And it was a great run for like 3 months of playing.
And that brings me to a different question. It's the subject that some stories do have an end. Some stories should have an end. Some video games don't have an end. What do you feel is best, and why? Let's start with him.
I'm going to go with having a defined end, but you can take as long as you want to get there. Because that's part of the fun of playing the game in the first place. So yeah, it will come to an end eventually, whatever that end is. So in After the War it was saving the town. In Trashkin it was getting the alien human back to their pod, having explored Earth, and causing chaos in the interim. And I don't know, just something that feels like a conclusion. It doesn't have to be solid or really mind-blowing. It could be just, yeah, I'm going home now.
But do you think it should match the level of commitment that you put into it? So, if you have, for example, Final Fantasy VII was the first one I played. And the first time I ran straight through it. You didn't do anything, got absolutely owned several times. 17 hours later, finally managed to beat it and went, there, perfect ending, no problem at all. And I played through it again with the guide. And 100 hours later, got to the end of it and went, that was too easy. Sephiroth at the end, turned up, went, yeah, that's it.
I have issues with computer games because I get bored easily. So after the first one or two tries through, I'm just done with repeating the start bit.
Yeah.
I think some games are too long, and a lot of them aren't, which is great because I mean a lot of the games I've been playing recently are quite linear and are quite straightforward, and you can play through them in 3 or 4 hours. And to me, that's great because it's more like a sort of, I mean, games like Inside, which has incredible like visual storytelling, or What Remains of Edith Finch, amazing game. You can play through it. It's almost like inhabiting a film or something. And it has a very defined endpoint, and I love it for that because it lives in my mind in its bubble of what it was. But then, by the same token, I mean, I've talked to lots of people who've played really old school games, and stuff like Dwarf Fortress, which they define their own endings by failing, usually spectacularly, at something. So I think it's all about how, even if it doesn't sort of wrap up in this epic way, like whether it exists in your memory as a kind of complete thing. Maybe that's part of it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I absolutely used to adore RuneQuest. But the moment I stepped out of the safe zones into areas where PvP was a thing that you could do, people just kept killing me, and then I had to go back to the start again, and it was just like, I just want to play and do the quests, leave me alone.
I have two answers to this, because I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan as well. You know, Final Fantasy VII was my first, well actually no, Breath of Fire 3, but then Final Fantasy VII was my first, the game I fell in love with. So, for the most part, I think that a game should have a defined ending. And I find that, you know, when you get things like New Game Plus and stuff like that, I don't ever engage with that, because when the story's over for me, it's over for me, and that's, I think this is a, you know, emotional journey that you go on, isn't there? And when the emotional journey is over, I don't really want to go back. I feel like, having said that, the best game that I probably ever played, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with the game Journey.
Oh,
It's my absolute favourite game in the world, and it doesn't end. Sorry, plug your ears if you don't want to hear about Journey and how it ends, but the spoiler alert for Journey is that it's a cycle, and your character gets to the end, this final destination, and they ostensibly die, and they are back at the beginning. So the implications that Journey is constantly reiterating over and over again. That's the best story that a game's ever told for me. So mostly, yes, I love endings, I love an endpoint, except when it's done like Journey did it.
Not so much an ending as a continuation of the road goes ever on.
But in a way, that is the story of it. That is the ending. The ending is that it goes on forever. Yeah, it doesn't end.
I think the only one that I've replayed frequently after the first playthrough, straight start to end, was a little pixelated thing from the 90s called Castle of the Winds, which was basically a little dungeon crawler. Great and fun. Because it was super plot-light. It was literally go through the dungeon, kill things, collect stuff, level up, go save your dad. And that was it. It was great. And I think the other one was Dragon Riders of Pern. That was mostly because I was absolutely obsessed with the Dragon Riders of Pern at the time.
There's been some great shorter games recently that have this sort of emotional journey at the heart of them. So there's one that came out a couple of years ago called A Short Hike, which is really sweet, and it's basically like Ghibli, but you kind of run around this sort of Ghibli-esque island, and we played that during one of the first lockdowns. I was like, oh, I needed this. It was so wholesome and nice, and it was just like a great kind of short emotional journey. Like, I wouldn't necessarily play it again, but I really liked what it's like contained space when I was in it.
I've got one that's quite nice and wholesome. It's very open-ended, but again, it's wholesome. It's basically Stardew Valley light, only your protagonist is a bunny. It's called Suki. It's
I was just going to say, the phone game. Yes. I love that. Suki goes to the city. He goes to the mountains.
Yeah, it's great. I do like the woods where there's the creepy friend.
Yes.
That's always fun. But yeah, I've been really enjoying Pokemon Go because it gets me out and about, and I can game while I'm exercising. That's just the best thing ever, because I well, I weigh far too much, but I actually exercise playing that.
The best thing about Pokemon is there's literally opposite my house, there's a Pokemon gym in the park. Like from my kitchen, I can literally watch people. And then a friend of mine was around, he realised he can sort of actually access it from our kitchen, completely hidden from view, which is always quite fun.
At one of the conventions we ran, we got in touch with them and they said we'll actually install a Pokemon gym in the middle of the convention. And you had people just stood around going, no, there's nothing else here. Like, no, there is. No, but can you move them and everybody else had to go like, no. Right, okay, that didn't work. Can you get it so it moves and people just follow it around? No. So, and moving on from that one, games that don't have a story. Do you think there are any? And do you think they can be played if they aren't? If you look at things like Tetris, ostensibly there was a story behind it, but are they as interesting as games that do have a story, or is the appeal completely different? For that one, we'll start with one.
That's a really interesting question, actually, because I mean, when you look at some of the games that are incredibly popular, and I just want to state here for the record that I don't buy into this whole real gamers versus fake gamers kind of thing. You know, if you play, your favourite game is Stardew Valley, your favourite game is Suzuki, they're games. So whenever I hear anybody who's sniffy about fucking Candy Crush, I'm like, do you remember how popular Tetris was? Candy Crush is Tetris for their new generation. So, and that's one of the most popular games in the world, right? Candy Crush. How many people get addicted to that game? But I think it is a different appeal. Like, I think there are games that you play because you want to be invested in the story. Like, I haven't played it yet, but I recently bought the game Disco Elysium because, I'm
amazing
so
writing in that game.
I am ready to fall in love with Kim Kitsuragi. I am very ready for this. But I'm playing that because I know the story. I'm going to love the story in that, right? That's the principal reason I buy that. I play Tekken because I want to beat people up. There's a story in Tekken. I don't give a shit what the story in Tekken is. I want to beat people up in Tekken. So I do think, even if there's an ostensible, or like, if I play wrestling games or whatever, I'm not playing it for the story. I'm playing it for the, I don't know.
It's kind of like doing a crossword or something.
Yeah, it really is actually.
It's like the difference between reading a book and doing a crossword or a Sudoku. Yeah. It's kind of that level, which is great. I mean, this is why games are amazing, right? Like, such a vast level of engagement across the format.
I quite like world-building games. The one I really want to try out is on Apple, the subscription one, and I just refuse to do the subscription thing. But I've come across some really good ones. I mean, Settlers 2 is always going to be my winner, and I'm going to miss that so much because I've lost all of my software and stuff. But my current one, and I am a massive geek, is the My Little Pony one. It's also catches me on the you've got to collect all the things because it's got achievements for that. Otherwise, I quite enjoy some of the mindless stuff where you don't have to engage your brain too much, because I engage my brain far too much in my day job. So I have things like 2 Dots, or I Love Hue, which is literally just colour matching, and it's lovely.
I don't think it is mindless. Like, it's interesting because it's like you're still engaged in an activity
in
a way.
Mindfulness.
It's an actual like a thing you're engaging your brain in on whatever level. Like,
it's meditation in game form.
It is, yeah.
I've got a Rubik's Cube. I love those things.
Yeah.
And there's no challenge to it at all. No way I can't not beat it. But for those 2 or 3 minutes, it's like, no problem at all, I'm doing nothing else but this.
That's magic to me. I can never do that.
Isn't that basically what Animal Crossing is, though? I mean, Animal Crossing was massively popular during lockdown because it is just a gentle game that doesn't really require any deep understanding of story. You just go fishing and you plant some flowers and you make your house look nice, and you pay Tom Nook all the money because he's a capitalist bastard, and that's... But it's just joy. You don't need a story. I think, mindfulness and meditation is actually a really good... I think that really taps into something.
Yeah.
it's interesting because, like, I think there is a market for those sort of pastoral kind of kind of building games, whatever they are. And a friend of mine in Bristol, he had released a game called The Colonists fairly recently, and that's exactly what he's trying to do, is these sort of games which don't have a really steep learning curve, which aren't going to punish new players,
and you don't have to fight against other players and lose half your territory.
Yeah, they're just kind of pastoral kind of building games. You can apply however much logic or however little logic you want to them.
I have to play, when I've got a spare minute in there, I play Magic the Gathering on the computer, which I've been playing with cards since 1993. But you just can't get all the players these days. And most of them go, aren't you too old for this one? Yeah, I thought, well, yeah.
You're only as old as you allow yourself to be.
100%.
Which is why I still love My Little Pony.
I completely agree, the 9-year-olds don't.
You wait till they get to 35, then they'll understand.
Revenge will be mine, but they'll be saying, what are you talking about, Gramps? Minor thing. But, yeah, that's, and there we go, we're all massively engaged, so we're all going through the questions in no time at all. Does anybody have any questions? There's one thing.
You mentioned that you're working on procedurally generated games and that you prefer linear games. I was wondering if you're writing a book, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you can build into acts. But there's a few games that have like branching stories. Do you have any techniques or tools that you use to make sure that this branch is the interesting branch, or make sure you don't go, this branch is the interesting branch, and this branch kind of sucks?
Can I take that one? Yes. With that one, I've been running games as a professional GM for more years than I care to think. And a part of it is reading what the players are after. The problem behind it being is I'm presuming, when you've got a computer generated game, you can't read around the table what the players are after. So, do you have to make them all just as interesting? Which, oh dear God, I can't imagine anything worse.
I learned this.
Look, there's a trinket over here, and the players go, fantastic, no problem, chase that.
Yeah.
Perfect, no problem.
The first ever game I worked on was a real trial by fire. It was basically multiplayer interactive fiction. So every branch someone could go down, you then have 3 different options, and then you multiply that by 4 players. And so in the end, I was just like, we used flowchart software in the end as the only way to keep a track on it. But they all had to be as interesting because we had no idea, absolutely no idea what each player would pick. And we kept control of it at certain points by bringing things back to pinch points, and then kind of out again. And I think, this is the difficult thing with interactive storytelling, whether the decision feels meaningful. And I think it's not so much meaningful, is it rewarding emotionally or, for a player? So that's what we were really trying to focus on. Does it feel like a rewarding game experience, whichever path they've gone down?
I think the reason my studio decided in the end to go with the linear game is because we knew basically there's a story we wanted to tell, and we felt that by offering kind of very arbitrary, split off points that would ultimately come back to the same story, it kind of detracts a little bit, in our case at least, from the story that we are trying to tell, which is one unified narrative. So I think if you're trying to tell a specific story that doesn't split off, there aren't multiple possibilities. I think it possibly can detract a little bit if you offer the illusion of choice too much. We do have a few areas in the game where there is a somewhat illusion of choice, but it's not the promise that you're going to get a different story. The story will always be the story in our case. So I think that's why we made the decision that we made, that ultimately there will be no benefit from kind of splitting off because we're still trying to tell the same story. That's,
Ink is great for experimenting with this though, because it's so, you can write little short things and then kind of veer off quite dramatically, but because it's such an easy tool to work with, you can experiment to see how different a story can end up. And that I've had a lot of fun recently. I write things and just put them up for free on itch just because it's quite fun to experiment with how many choices can I make and it still end up kind of different for each player.
I can't really add too much to that. I'm most recently getting into Connected Path and Keepsake games. Gion Shim and Xingyin Core are literally leaders for that. It's amazing. I just finished playing A Field Guide to Memory, which is about cryptids. It's fantastic and really, really deep, and the ending's perfect. It's beautiful, and it ran live over the course of about 2 weeks. It took me about 3 months to play through it because obviously time, day job stuff.
and it was great fun. And that's inspired me to want to write one.
And from my perspective, way back at the original Final Fantasy books and everything else, which appeared to be multiple choice, but actually they all eventually led round to the same thing. Or you found a tunnel somewhere and something killed you. And that's your warning of, yeah, remember that page reference, have 4 pages in the book and then hope for the best. But there was still the ongoing narrative that you would eventually get there, or you'd die along the way. And yeah, I haven't seen permadeath that much these days, but I find some of the roguelikes are very much, it's the thrill of the fact that you could die and have to start again.
Yeah.
So you play harder as a result. And
with the connected path ones, because it's a solo journaling thing, every single person's story is going to be completely different to the others, apart from the main beats.
yeah, all good. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Narrative storytelling in video games, especially for the environment. Now, how do you articulate the story in the background when it's not spoken? How do you kind of explain that to the developers? And then this is what I want to happen.
I love stuff like this. Like environmental storytelling is like, and so I mentioned the game Inside, which I played fairly recently, and that there's literally no dialogue at all, no written words, but it's so atmospheric in what it manages to do. It's just an amazingly developed game. But it always reminds me of, I think it's in Half-Life, isn't it Half-Life 2 with the Citadel?
Incredibly.
That's an amazing piece of, because I mean it's there the whole time, and then it gets gradually closer and closer. And to me, that's an incredible bit of environmental storytelling with this, like, the aim is just there staring at you and you're making your way towards it. And so stuff like that I love. It's really clever. The game I'm working on, we're trying to embed the lore in everyday objects. So in things like, there'll be graffiti and posters on the streets, but even in how things are presented in this sort of quite corporate, like, quite fascist kind of world, that will influence the design of a lot of the objects and things. So I mean, and it's great being able to work closely with an artist on that stuff, because he'll design something and I'll go, oh, it looks a bit too nice actually. Like everything should look a bit screwed up in this world. So then he'll go back and like tweak it a bit. But yeah, amazing opportunities.
We're getting a similar thing in my game. So we've just obviously all the level design, basic level design has been done, and now it's getting its art pass, and the artists are adding little things as we go along. Like there's one level we had where the creatures that you fight have started to build little cairns, and there's little skulls of these guys, and the story's not told, but you come to realise, hang on a second, they've got their own like little religion going on here, and it adds a little dimension to it, because in the first half of the game you just killing these guys, bang 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 bang, they're dead. You never communicate with them in any way, shape or form. Then you learn what they are, and then you kind of come to realise, hang on a second, there's some kind of depth here, and we never kind of go into, we never explain it, but it's to be kind of intuited. And the narrative team didn't write that. That was the artists. The artists have taken the story that we've written and gone, we're just going to add little bits in here for fun, and that's a wonderful thing. The artists
love flavour notes like that. They just make a game.
Yeah.
You're my kind of player.
But you were talking about Inside, and I'll come back to it again. Journey does the same thing. Journey has no dialogue at all. It's just the only thing that you know is there's this mountain in the distance that you have to go to, and the only way it tells a story is these murals, these kind of moving murals. And again, no dialogue, no sound, nothing. You just watch the story unfold. And I think there's a lot of interpretations, but it's pretty obvious that there's some kind of apocalyptic event that's happened in this world, and that's why it's in ruins. And a lot of it's left to your imagination, but it's so beautifully done that you don't need anything more than what they give you.
There we go. Any more questions?
Great question.
There we go.
Yeah, given the fact that like in video games there's a big emphasis at the moment on massive multiplayer things like PUBG and Fortnite and things like that, and in roleplay, D&D holds a massive market share, which is just about dungeon crawling, and board games there's an emphasis on Euro games, so like you're just making a stained glass window. Do you feel like narrative storytelling in games is like a shrinking market? Where do you see it going from this point? Do you think it's going to resurge, or is it going to be dwindling? Just interested on your views on that.
If I'm honest on that one, it's only going to increase. D&D from even 4 or 5 years ago when 5th edition was first thought about to now, it's colossal. there's a D&D weekend. D&D Live is on right now, in fact, across the weekend. They've got multi-million-pound productions going into there. There's live stagings going on. There's celebrities. It's the interest level in interactive things. People are just starting to realise, actually, I can play that. I can do that. I don't need to be Matt Mercer, which too many people think of that one, but I don't need to be Matt Mercer. I can just have a good game around the table with my friends. With the massive multiplayer ones, you will still have a group of people that you play with. It will still be a smaller group of people that you always go raiding with, that you always go playing with, and it's the same dynamic with the tabletop games. Maybe not so much for the individual computer games where you're at home and it's just the storyline on a straight, but anything else where there's people involved, I think that's only going to increase, if I'm honest. But
Yeah, no, totally. Not only I can play that, but I can write that. It's like we've been talking about the solo journaling games as well. I mean, and all of that feeds into tools like Inkle and Twine. And this is the great thing about Itch. Like, it's such a great site because anyone can put up anything, and you've got these really supportive, like small communities of people doing their own kind of niche things. And it's just great to see, Inkle hold Ink Jam every year, which is really great. And I did that last year, I couldn't do it this year. But again, a really great way to meet a group of people from all over the world, just all interested in experimenting with these forms. So yeah, I think the tools are out there and they're free and people are going to pick up on it.
And there's a lot of stuff from not in the West. I've recently picked up a copy of Ryutama. That's really, really wholesome and gentle. You're a merchant, you're travelling, you're trading. There's no fighting whatsoever.
I mean, from my point of view, I think narrative games are never going to die. I don't think they will. And I know I'm not the only person in the world, because I saw a tweet the other day, and it probably been going around for a while, and it made me laugh because it's true. And they said, I want shorter games with worse graphics that take longer to make, and I'm not even joking about it. And I agree with that person. I do want shorter games with worse graphics that take longer to make, because I've never really enjoyed, multiplayer games, massive multiplayer games. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with them. I mean, my husband is very into multiplayer games. I prefer playing games by myself. So I will always favour a game that tells a story that I can play on my own, in my room, and absorb into that story. I grew up on classic JRPGs. I was a Final Fantasy nerd, so that's my wheelhouse, and that will never die. That will, and you're right. I think the multiplayer games will continue to increase in popularity, but there will always, always, always be a niche for people like me who just want to have a story to myself in
you
private.
still have that emotional content with it. In fact, some of them are one of the most formative things, Eris.
Yeah. Maybe even more so in a narratively driven game. I think a narratively driven game, and this isn't to say that one form is better than another because they all do different things, but I do think that if you want emotional impact, the narrative-driven game will trump a multiplayer game every time, just purely because it's you and the game, and you have that soul connection.
You're the protagonist.
Literally, yeah.
And in your own story, and it's great. I see computer games, narrative ones, as basically you're playing your own novel.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can't kind of beat that connection that you have. Eris is an incredible example of that. And it isn't the only game there I sat there and it felt emotionally kind of, had that.
There's that moment of, that's not right.
And I was, 12 when I played that bit, and even as an adult, it has the same effect.
I was 20-something, it still hit me.
Yeah. They basically future-proofed it anyway with the holodeck on Star Trek. It's basically gaming, only you're part of it.
Or Red Dwarf, better than life if you... yeah. Which I still want.
Any other questions? David?
Like last year I played through Bendy and the Ink Machine and I thought, what the hell? And then I played it through again and I thought, what the hell? Because I do a bit of games writing myself, contributing to Onyx Path and Michael and a couple of people. I narrowly missed out on a chance to write for the new Paranoia game.
Yep.
And I've recently discovered the Scp Foundation, and I was wondering what the panel's thoughts were on games that don't only not explain themselves, but joyously tease their audience to make up the story for them.
I mean, I love it because I just love weird, and I love being pushed off my footing narratively. Because I think that's the thing when you work in a narrative format. I mean, I'm awful to watch films with sometimes. They've embedded that thing, so that's going to come back. You can see the beats coming. So anything that just pushes me off what I think is going to happen. I'm like, oh, this is great, I love it. Anything that gets my imagination firing as well, I'm all for it. But
I love noodle incidents where they don't explain it at all. You and I remember Budapest very differently. Marvel, brilliant. I hope they never explain Budapest. I don't want to know what went on in Budapest. Noughts and crosses, fair enough, no problem at all. But you know, but for me, it's that moment of no, we're not going to explain that. Slay Industries, they never explained it. But you get to the end and you're like, I can think of a million things that could go. That sparks the imagination so much more. Yeah, but,
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
One of my favourite game series is the Silent Hill series, and I think Silent Hill lost its way when it tried to explain everything. Silent Hill 1 and 2, the radio. Silent Hill 1 and 2 don't really tell you anything. You've just got this theory about, oh, it's, the monsters are they an expression of his inner turmoil, are they? And there's this wonderful bit in Silent Hill, I think it's Silent Hill 2 or is it Silent Hill 3, I forget which, I think 3, where she talks about the monsters and the guy turns around and goes, they look like monsters to you. And that's never explained, and it's never gone into any further than that, and you're kind of like, wait a minute, the implications of it are huge, and it never comes up again, and it never has to come up again. It's beautiful.
Chris.
So before I ask a question, have the panel played Her Story?
I know of it, but I keep meaning to, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was just thinking, what I wanted to know from a writing point of view is that's such a clever sort of mixture of form and content. What I was really wondering is that something like Her Story, is that a gameplay style that you think could be used to tell other stories, or is that very much a thing in it? It's like a one-off thing in itself, and they couldn't do anything else with it. I understand. Probably a difficult question if you've not played it all the way to the end, but
a story, no matter how you tell it, it's always going to be a story, no matter how it comes across, no matter how it's presented, no matter what you do to get to it. If you're making the decisions, or if you're just following the decisions, would you kindly?
it's to give it
simple things like that, where you
Yeah.
you think this is all free will, and they throw that one at the end of it, and there was a brief minute of, nope, my controller's going down, that's it, I've done all that on purpose and you made me.
But again, provokes a reaction.
It does.
Superb.
Amazing.
And it's a really good meta commentary on what games are like, isn't it? Because you do genuinely think, oh yeah, I've done awesome. Yeah, you realise that the game itself is telling you, I made you do all of this. Yeah, you didn't even know.
Does anybody not have the would you kindly reference?
From
No?
Bioshock.
Bioshock. No, thank God. There we go. I thought you would, but just in case. That's right. Any other questions?
Hello. I'm just going to be very cheeky and ask for recommendations because I've been playing the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which has taken up about 3 months of my life. And I'm coming very close to the end now, which I've been putting off because it's very emotional. But what game would you recommend I leap into after that? Something that will sustain me after the emotional trauma of Mass Effect.
That will be nice to you or might do the same again.
I'm quite happy either way, really.
Okay. Any recommendations?
It obviously depends on what kind of games you like, but the two games that I've seen people really enjoy recently, and one of them will be Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I haven't played it. I've watched my husband play it, and I am going to play it. But that's And also, you may already play this Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You know exactly what games I like.
In that case,
The Witcher series.
The Witch. Yeah. Well, no.
From the books as well.
I'm going to indulge myself here. Yakuza 7. Even if you haven't played any of the other Yakuza games, Yakuza 7 you can jump into, and it's got a JRPG kind of flavoured combat system, which makes it, I think, more accessible to people who've never played it before. The stories are fun. It's a little bit silly. It's engaging. It's just incredible. I think you will really enjoy it.
I would never have picked that up without someone telling me to.
It looks like a really hyper masculine, I'm going to beat people up game. It absolutely isn't. It's got a lot of heart and soul to it. I would definitely recommend that.
Does it still have a car cafe?
It had a cafe.
I mean, we've already covered Disco Elysium. I'm desperate to play that one. It's probably a big dose of weirdness rather than. So I suppose it depends how into it you're going to get.
I do like the look of that, so I think
Yeah. I mean, if you like city builder sims, then the one I mentioned, The Colonist, is a definite time sink. And it's one of those ones you go, oh, I'll just play a bit of it, and then it's like 5 hours later, and it's 1 in the morning. So that's a good one. I mean, we recently, me and my partner, ended up replaying Trine, and the Trine games, and that's, as a co-op game, that one's great, because you can just like do 20 minutes, and it's really fun, and it's not too demanding, and so it's a nice one to play on like after work, or just to like unwind a bit, and that one was quite fun as well. They're quite old school, but...
Not much of a computer gamer now, so I can't really add to the awesome. But if you're looking for something that's relaxing or stimulating or just getting your brain going, I do recommend Connected Path games. They're really good.
For me, I'm going to go back to old school. Final Fantasy VII, the remake as well, which it's spectacular. There is just the one ending, but it's really worth it when you get to it.
It's so worth it.
Never dealt with Final Fantasy, and I feel like it's this huge gap in
It's
Now is the
dangerous
time.
one. It's
Now
a
is the
dangerous
time.
one. It's not just a rabbit hole, it's a warren.
I would actually say start with Final Fantasy VII Remake because it isn't the whole story and it will give you the flavour of it, and then I think you will find that you'll want to go back to the original, because I think if you start with the original, it is PS1 graphics and maybe that might be a bit jarring. If you start with the newer game, and then when you get back into it, you'll kind of be like, okay, I get this now, you know. But 100% go dive in, it's superb.
Yeah. I think we have time for one last question if anyone has one. And at the back there.
Slightly pretentious question, but do you ever have the feeling that a game is playing you, and how does that make you feel?
Would you kindly?
Yeah, I just...
Yes.
Yeah. To be fair, I thought that was one of the seminal moments in games ever. That moment where he goes, would you kindly, and you're looking at it on the wall, you wander in, and just, would you kindly run? And then suddenly you're not your character anymore because they just run away. And there was that wonderful moment of you, absolute perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. For me, anyway.
Cool. I have found that our tabletop roleplay gaming, you can sort of blur the lines of what's real and what's not, because it's in your head already, and so you're living it, but you're not. And I had a hard time because my first roleplay game was this mage game, and I put a heck of a lot of myself into the character, and oh my god, yeah, I had to pull back from that character quite hard because I was losing myself.
So it's not hard to do, unfortunately.
There was when I did Ink Jam a couple of years ago, there's an amazing interactive fiction game, and it was so clever, and I was like, you bastard. And it was called the Basilisk Dialogue. It's a little itch game. It's basically you're a mouse trying to convince a snake not to eat you. And so you go through these series of questions. That one, I was just a bit like, I don't feel like I'm making any kind of informed choice here. Like, I'm not sure where this is going. That was probably one of the ones where I really felt like it knew more than I did about what I was choosing.
I'm going to bring back Silent Hill 2 here, because there's a bit in Silent Hill 2 where it knows what you're scared of, it knows what it's setting up, and you walk into this room and there's this horrible noise, absolutely awful noise coming from this school locker room. And then you know there's something in there, you think, fuck, there's something in there, I know what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to get my big stick out and I'm going to have to attack it. So you go in there, your adrenaline's pumping, your hackles are up, you're hunched over your controller like that, you're like, right, I'm ready to hit it, I'm ready to hit it, I'm ready to hit it, and a fucking cat jumps out of the locker and runs away. It knew, it fucking knew.
I would not be brave enough to play that. I'd have thrown and gone.
And I thought, you absolute bastards. So yes.
There we go. So I shall roll up at that. And I'd just like to finish with thanking everybody for turning up. You've been absolutely superb. If we just go through everybody one at a time, is there anything you'd like to mention or anything you'd like to promote on the way?
Other than go buy Gion Shim and Shin Yunkor's games, they are amazing. Shin has recently done a mending which involves roleplay and sewing. And I think Gion's latest was A Shape of Shadows, which is you are an apprentice to a magician. And they are so cool. They collaborated on the Field Guide to Memory, and that was just like, oh my god.
I'm going to have to check these out, they sound great. I'm doing reading at 9 from 10 low, in case anyone wants to come along. I also have a copy to give away, but you have to play dice with me to win it.
Yeah.
So I've got some dice, if you roll over an 11, you win a copy. But so yeah, that's all I've really got to mention.
I've got reading at 10, so after that, they're good timing, isn't it? And it'll be in the dark and it should be spooky, so yeah, come along to that if you want to. I will be sober, hopefully. And then, yeah, just keep an eye out in May or June for when my game comes out, because I'm not allowed to say anything about it yet.
Can you tell us what it's called?
It hasn't got a name yet, but I work for Bonsai Collective. It's our first game, and I'm biased, but I think it's going to be really good.
Oh, I can't wait.
There we go. And for myself, if you're interested in more games, I have the Dragon League convention in December. Drop by that one anytime at all. I have every intention of inviting these three to come down and actually do another panel like this, because I've loved this. So, absolutely. But thank you all for everything. Thank you for being here for us, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you.